Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Cameron English here with you, Director of Biosciences at the American Council on Science and Health. Joined again by my colleague, Dr. Chuck Dinerstein, our Director of Medicine. And we also have a special guest with us. He's a frequent contributor to our website. His name is David Lightsey. David, how are you today?
Fine, thank you.
So you write a lot about nutrition. You're the author of a really good book that I would recommend everyone. It's called The Myths About Nutrition Science, and you can get it anywhere. And I've really enjoyed it. I've learned quite a bit from reading it. But for people who aren't familiar with your work, just take a few seconds and introduce yourself.
Well, in graduate school, I noticed a lot of junk science being produced by professors that just seemed to be more biased, bent on presenting things than they were anything else. But anyway, after graduate school, I started working I ran a metabolic lab, an exercise physiology lab for a large medical practice for about 7 or 8 years. And during the course of that, I became involved with Dr. Jarvis at Loma Linda University in his National Council Against Health Fraud. It was a national consumer advocacy group, and their emphasis was a widespread basis of individuals who had various backgrounds that just combated misinformation in the health marketplace, health and medicine. And he asked me to run the nutrition, exercise science area and basically be a cog there to forward any media inquiries or anything they had in my direction locally here to my lab to answer and respond to. NBC Dateline, CBS, all the big ones, the little ones, small ones, coaches, whatever it may be. So that started the process of the health fraud stuff, and then I published my first paper with the National Strength and Conditioning Association Journal, just illustrating, which basically led to the first book, the myths and misconceptions the sports supplement industry portrays or misrepresents their products for the athletic community. And that's just loaded with misinformation. So the first focus was on the athletics in general. And that spread out, and then Dr. Barrett jumped in and asked me to work with him with Quack Watch in addition to the National Council Against Health Fraud. So I started handling more broad-based subjects, obesity, just general nutrition science in general, just a wide variety of things. And it led to more media stuff and more writing, and it just led to teaching, and then led to the second book, which was an accumulation of stuff I'd picked up over the years, which is just utter nonsense, or you see so much in the media that's frequently presented in the media as fact when it isn't at all. But early on, to ACSH credit, a lot of my stuff was spurred by the correct information I was picking up from ACSH early on. And I also presented, that was also required reading, as I've mentioned in some of my articles. My students had required reading, especially nursing students, for that website because it was consistently the website that I knew I could turn to get accurate information. So that website actually led to a lot of the focus I had on a number of issues and gave a good background for a lot of the material that I've written on. And that led, after I had the exercise physiology lab, I went on to the physical rehabilitation area, doing a wide variety of work screens for the local industry here, oil, ag, industry in particular, where we do a lot of pre-employment screens to make sure that individuals are capable of doing what we call the American Disabilities Act specific job requirements, lifting, carrying, all that sort of thing. So pre-employments, and then anyone injured during the work process, they had to go through this process again post-recovery to make sure they go back to work. And that process, of course, we saw a wide variety of lifestyles that basically presented themselves that made a lot of people more susceptible to these injuries than others. And that's, of course, my big take is the obesity thing. A lot of people mismatched with their job responsibilities based upon their body types. And it's a shortage of the industry of actually healthy, strong males to do certain tasks anymore, because a lot of the so-called healthy males are now quite large, and they can't handle the job tasks for extended periods of time, and therefore we saw a lot of injuries in the rehab facility related to overwork syndrome.
Very, very interesting stuff. Well, I want to turn attention to the article that you wrote for us. It's a good jumping off point, the comments about obesity. So the article is called "Can I Eat a Chocolate Chip Cookie in Peace?" which I thought was hilarious. It's an excellent title, by the way. Can you tell us about the thesis of the story? What's the point you're trying to make here?
Well, that kind of started years ago. I was asked by Jarvis to do a talk at Loma Linda University. It was a health fraud talk, and it was on nutrition, of course. And every time I go somewhere and someone introduced my background, they get paranoid. They've got to serve me the right foods, eat the right things, say the right things. It's kind of annoying. So during the course of this lecture, we gave the lecture first, and we had dinner afterwards. So I gave the lecture. We did a presentation at Loma Linda University. And the audience spilled out, and the individuals spilled out to the cafeteria. In the cafeteria, I don't eat a lot of. I eat sweet and basically on weekends, but I love chocolate cream pie. And at the end of the counter, at the very end of the cafeteria counter, was chocolate cream pie, and I spotted that the moment I entered the aisle, the line. Well, I let all my colleagues go through before me because I wanted to see what they were going to do with that chocolate cream pie. None of them picked up a piece. So I grabbed 2 pieces and went back to the table with it, because they weren't big pieces. And I sat down and I realized that every one of them got up and went back and got a piece. The point is, everyone seems to be overly obsessed with this health thing. And that if you're eating well, those minor instances you have of taking in chocolate cream pie or ice cream or whatever it may be, a chocolate chip cookie in the article's case, is going to do nothing to your health. And we're obsessed with the so-called health food and clean food, or whatever you may want to call it.
So I'm wondering, Chuck, because you're of all of us here, you were a physician for many years. You still are a physician, but you know what I'm saying. Have you seen this sort of this extremism where you have, like among patients, you have people who are really concerned about nutrition and they're obsessed with weight loss, they're obsessed with the gym. And then you have people on the other side who just seem not to care. So I'm wondering, have you seen that in the people you've worked with over the years as a doctor?
Yeah, so I would have to say that most of my patients fall into the I don't care, I'm a sloth category. But having said that, there are certainly people that I've met along the way that count every calorie, that make very big distinctions about what they can and cannot eat. And what David talks about is interesting because there are some studies that show that when you offer people a healthy alternative, they feel so virtuous having had the healthy alternative that they overeat on the dessert. So they wind up with net more calories simply because they began with a virtuous salad rather than anything else. So human behavior is very tough to predict.
Right. So someone gets a Diet Coke and they go, well, I drank the Diet Coke, so I'm gonna go with the chocolate pie at the end of my meal.
Right. Well, not only was there no calories in the Diet Coke, but I was very virtuous about doing that. So there must be some reward for this good behavior.
Okay. David, what I found interesting, because I write a lot about obesity, a lot of us do at ACSH, but you really went after people who are utterly obsessed, like Chuck was just saying. And you have an anecdote in here about one of the parents of one of your students in your nutrition class. Can you recount that story for us? I think that's actually very, very helpful for people.
Yes, it's almost a Nazi version of the thing. She was so obsessed with the whole idea that her children were contradicting or learning to contradict what she was saying at home or teaching at home. They were picking up, obviously, in their college class, which led to the confrontation. But knowing who she was, I was kind of expecting it to some degree, and I knew when she walked in that I would get that kind of assault because I knew her background. Even though she was a physical therapist and had the science training, she picked up all the wrong misinformation. But that's not unusual for me to get that kind of flack. People come in. I have parents that would come through the facility and be adamant about only giving their kids unpasteurized milk, organic foods. The food processing facilities are poisonous. Things in food are poisonous. Blah blah blah. The same old stories you hear all the time. They're so obsessed with this. They don't understand that it's not what you eat. It's what you don't eat. It's the big problem for most people. It's not the processed food that's doing it. It's the lack of the fruits and vegetables in the diet that's doing it for most. So they always point to, yes, a diet high in processed foods causes this or causes that. that may be true, but it's not because of the processed foods and molecules in it. It's because it's absent of the molecules that they get from fruits, vegetables, and etc. So the diets are usually deplorable, and what we've referred to in the past in articles is the LSD diet, lousy, stinking diet. So when they have a dietary and lifestyle habits that are deplorable, you can expect deplorable health consequences down the road. That's just common sense. It doesn't take a study to tell you that.
That's an interesting way to talk about the diet. And again, flipping the script and saying it's not so much that you're eating processed foods, it's that you're not eating something to counterbalance or that we know are going to be more nutritious overall.
Let me give you an example from my courses. And this, remember, I live in a county that's either number one or number two in agricultural production in the U.S. So we're big in ag here, ag and oil. Now I do 5-day diet histories in all my students each semester when I was teaching, and it is for the majority of my students every semester. It would be rare for most of those students here in this community that's a heavy ag, produce a lot of fruits and vegetables, to have more than 5 or 6 fruits or vegetables over the course of an entire 5-day diet history. Their diets are basically made up, like, as you said, processed foods, fast food places. Most of them would starve to death without McDonald's. They insist on eating things on the go and as packaged and as convenient as possible. And even though they're very well aware of what they have available to them at a much lower price, but i.e. the fruits and vegetables because we grow them here. But that's common, and that's been that way for the whole 15 years I was teaching.
Do you think, David, that this has something to do with the fact that we're no longer sitting down for family meals or taking the time to eat, that it's very much one of these convenient on the go, I got some other things to do, I'll just multitask a meal in while I'm walking?
Oh, absolutely. I was dropping my car off this morning to get some engine repair on it. I drove my wife's car back. So I was coming back by the house here down by the college, roughly 15 to 8. And the whole entire right lane that would go through the intersection was backed up about, I'd say 2 blocks for the line to get into drive-through McDonald's. So everyone's trying to get into a fast food restaurant to get their immediate breakfast and coffee and then go to work. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. When I was growing up and when you were growing up, most people went home. There was one parent home. Dinner was there. You sat down as a family and you ate. Then you went outside and played. That's completely contrary to what's taking place today. You pick up something on the way, or the family will pick up something on coming home, and you'll sit down and have fast food. So yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I want to get both of you to give me your take on this, because David, you said something in your article that I've seen Chuck write in different forms over the time I've followed his writing. So, David, you say any inclination to change entrenched, stupid, passed long ago. And by the way, you're talking about this parent that you're interacting with at work. So you say, so I gave her a moment to vent, suggested she take the course to become better informed and return to patient care. There was no chance of success. Stupid came in and stupid left. So I think the point is very important there, which is that there are some people you can help, and then there are some people who sadly are just lost causes when it comes to education about nutrition or any sort of a science topic. So elaborate on that. And then Chuck, I'm really curious to get your input on this, because I've heard you say the same thing about different interventions that you recommended to your patients. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and that's really not your problem. So go ahead, David, and then Chuck weigh in as well.
Well, I can think of some classic examples from work where we'd have patients that I'm going to resort to that blood type diet thing. We had a couple of patients on eat by your blood type diet. And we had one patient that was really struggling with the bike for her knee, trying to get basically the energy level up to do what she's supposed to do. And she was diabetic. And anyway, I offered her, we had an apple on board, and we had an orange in the building. I offered her an apple and an orange. She says, no, they're not for my blood type. And so and I try to persuade her to do this, but she was insistent that, no, this is my blood type, this is the way I should eat. So we get this type of individual that's so emphatic about what they perceive to be the truth about their lifestyle, and how they should eat, and how they should incorporate this, and how they should incorporate that. you just have to walk away. It's a lost cause. It's impossible in a 5-minute time frame to give them enough biochemistry to make them understand why they're wrong. And people have often asked me that in the course, that why don't you do this privately? And my students have asked this. I said, look, you've been here 16 weeks, 3 hours a night, and you're just now getting it. I said, how many people would pay me X number of dollars per hour to walk them through this? It wouldn't happen. So it's impossible for good science information, especially nutrition science information, to get out to the general public. It's almost impossible because you can't make money on it. You make money on selling devices. You make money on selling misinformation. You make money on selling pills and potions and specific diets. That's where the money is. You can't make money on good information.
There's a certain truth to that. As a physician, we often get more than one bite at the apple in terms of moving opinion. So once you've talked with the patient and you get the sense that they are very obstinate would be the wrong word, but they're dug into their position, then the best thing to do is to give them a little nudge, give them a little something to think about, because you're going to be back seeing them again in a few months, and you can continue that conversation and dialogue. But it's impossible when they're entrenched to move them, and it just becomes frustrating for the physician, and it becomes a bad health experience for the patient. There's no winning. You have to leave your ego at the door, which I find always very difficult. But you got to leave your ego at the door when you're making medical recommendations. Some people will take them, other people will not, and other people will not only not like them, but they'll go get themselves another opinion until they find one that they do like.
Oh, that's funny. Kind of defeats the purpose of going to a physician if you're just going to pick and choose based on what you think already. In any case, though, it seems that the best way to approach this, it's just balance. And again, I've heard you both make this point in your articles, right? It's the extremes we need to avoid. It's not one certain food. It's not, one particular activity necessarily. It's just balance. It's just a better way to live your life. So David, thank you for writing this article and joining us to discuss it a little bit. Let me tell people your book again. The latest one, I should say, is The Myths About Nutrition Science, and it's available everywhere. You can get it on Amazon. And then you can read all of David's stuff on our website. And last name is just Lightsey, David Lightsey. And there's all kinds of great stuff on here. The chocolate chip cookie one is just the most recent. So David, thank you for all the work you do for us, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for asking.
All right, everybody. Well, we're going to move on now, and we're going to jump into another article on our site that Chuck wrote. It was quite popular over the last couple weeks, and it's called Thinking Out Loud, Midinformation with a D, and the COVID Pandemic. So, Chuck, tell us what this story is about. And, well, first of all, what's midinformation, and then tell us what the story is.
Okay, so that was an interesting thing because I was just reading something completely different and that word popped up and I said, this explains a lot of things. Midinformation is not misinformation. It's not wrong information. It's just information that's in the process of changing, which to my mind was so much of the quote unquote science around COVID that science is not a noun, it's a verb. And we would take these snapshots in time and talk about this study or that study and take that as science, the noun. And midinformation, I think, to my mind, captures better the idea that we're talking about a moving target. And a lot of that comes from my experience as a physician, because we need to make decisions about people, and we rarely have complete information. We have oftentimes sufficient and necessary information, but not as much information as we might like. So making decisions based on midinformation appealed to me. And I thought it went a long way towards talking about this shame and blame game that is going on in social media about our response to COVID.
So you have a couple really interesting examples in here of midinformation. So the first one is under this subheadline called Fomites and the Rise of Disinfection Theater. Tell us about this example, because I think it helps illustrate.
Well, if you guys can remember, I have to admit, maybe I have COVID fog. Maybe what that means is I don't remember all the little moments along the way. But early on, we were being asked or told or read that you should leave your packages outside for a day, then bring them into the house and wear gloves and a mask while you open them to get inside them. Now, that was based on a article done by physicists that looked at the viability of various bacteria and viruses on different surfaces. And if I remember correctly, cardboard, they could remain viable for 24 hours. So the science from the physics point of view was spot on, except the fact was that we weren't talking about an infection that spread by contact with surfaces. We were talking about a respiratory infection. So that didn't become clear until later on. So all of that physics that had us keeping our packages at a distance was midinformation. True, but not the complete truth, and without the context that you really needed to use it in an appropriate way. So I don't fault anybody for suggesting that early on, because if you remember the atmosphere at that time, we were dealing with a killer virus that was busily eating up all the occupants in the nursing homes, and we had no way to know whether once it was done with the nursing homes, it would start eating up the rest of the population.
One thing I was really troubled by early on, and looking back, it's a fascinating observation about human psychology, was that people almost without direction divided themselves into extremes. It's a lot like the last story we were talking about, where there was no epistemic humility. Right. It was like, this is the science and everybody did it. And then that was the science until the science came along. And then that was the science. And if you questioned it, you were kicked out of the tribe. Right. So you had on the extreme side of things, I don't know what you want to call it. You had like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the sort of anti-vax crowd. Like within months, they were saying this was planned. They've been doing this. They want to usher in a techno-communist global government, and that it didn't matter that they didn't know anything about the virus, because no one knew anything about the virus at that point, really. And then I guess maybe on the other side, you had people that said, this is what we know. And if you don't accept this, you're a denier and you're working for the oil industry. And it just gave me the biggest headache. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
We saw the same thing. Better examples, I think, might be all the screaming about masks at the stores. The screaming by the people that you weren't wearing your mask and were putting everybody at the store at risk. And the equal amount of screaming from the other side, I can do what I want. That people became very dug in on their position, not because of the science per se, because how many of these people actually read any of the articles that form the basis of public health decisions? 1%, 2%, 3%. At that point, it became politicized and again became another way to signal which tribe you happen to belong in. And now the real fight was over COVID. We dropped all the other cultural concerns and the fight became around COVID more than anything else. And there is a point when you have to take the information you have and make a decision. That's why I was drawn to it, because as I said, physicians often make decisions under uncertainty. I have to take the information I have and make a decision. I'm going to operate. I'm not going to operate. I'm going to treat you with this drug. I'm not going to treat you with that drug, and it will have consequences. Now, making public health decisions is a very similar thing. You take the information you have and then you make some decisions about what you're going to do. I'm going to recommend the 6-foot rule. I'm going to recommend masks. I'm not going to recommend masks, whatever that might be. The part where it falls apart is that as a physician, I have to stand there. There's nobody else to turn to explain who made the choice. I made the choice. I bear the responsibility. And I think that the big failing has been not so much the science or the midinformation, is that we've had very few of the public health officials stand up and say, we made a mistake. And that drives things far more than anything else at this point. They made a mistake on both sides. And the other thing that I think feeds into this is that all of the social media commentators, all of the medical commentators on the internet, all of the social media, they carry no responsibility. When you're not responsible for the consequences of your actions, it's easy to recommend anything you want. But when you're held responsible for them, either to yourself or in a court or temporarily and over time, you pause a little bit before you make some choices that are there. And I think that too has been a big problem. To give you another example, it's very tough for surgeons to say that they didn't have an error in judgment or technique or something else when they operate on a patient and a day later they're dead. If an internist makes a mistake, it may be weeks before there's a problem. There's a long period of time that you can use to explain that lots of things happened along the way. It wasn't that one decision I made. And I think that too plays into it. Social media is not held responsible for their thoughts. They're just thoughts. Public health officials are held responsible, but unfortunately, none of them have stood up and said, well, this is what we did right and this is what we did wrong. And if we don't do that, then we're doomed to repeat it once again. We're doing the same thing now with monkeypox. Nothing's changed.
What's so fascinating to me is that I think taking responsibility would win them more support, and they would have the cooperation of more people if they were to come out, and very matter-of-factly. They don't have to get down on their knees and cry and beg for forgiveness. But if the leadership at the CDC or wherever would come out and just say, we didn't get X, Y, or Z right. We have looked at new evidence. We're monitoring it carefully. Here's what we think now. But as with all science, it's transitive, right? It's temporary, right? As new data come in, we're going to reevaluate. So we made a mistake. Here's what the science says. I think, and there's always going to be people who are going to say, oh, I knew all along, you guys are idiots, or you guys are, you're on the take from whoever the big bad industry is or whatever. But I think more people would see something like that and then go, okay, I can relate to that because I know what it's like to screw up and have to deal with the consequences. What do you think of that?
Oh, absolutely. And I find it fascinating to see that no one in public health leadership or middle management of public health has been able to get the wherewithal together to stand up and say, these are the things that we did wrong. There's nothing wrong with analyzing what you've done and recognizing where the problems were and correcting them. There's a classic book that was written to discuss Surgical Morbidity and Mortality Conference, the place that we go every week to discuss all the deaths and complications related to the surgery from the week before. And the title of the book is Forgive and Remember. And I think that that's the key. It certainly was the key to surgical M&M. And I think that it's a key to the COVID errors. We have to forgive the things that went wrong. Again, part of which gets back to that point you made earlier about humility. And we have to remember what we did wrong so we can try not to do it again.
It's a very good point, and I wish people would remember it. And I'm sure Chuck, you do this too. But for me, it's a perennial issue. You know, I try to be careful and I try to get things correct because, as someone who writes for the public, if I do something wrong or I say something that's incorrect, I get called on it, and so do you. You know, so I think that incentivizes us to try to be careful with the information that we're handling. And I think it would just be good if everybody did that. And a good place to start is Chuck's article. Again, it's called Thinking Out Loud, Mid-Information and the COVID Pandemic. You can get it on our website, which is ACSH.org. If you go up to the top, there's a little subscribe tab. Click on that and punch in your email address, and we will send you these stories 3 times a week in our Science Dispatch newsletter. And then the most popular articles, we review them. We talk about them on this show. So if you want to read those, you're going to be a little more informed when you show up. And you can also follow us on social media. It's just at ACSH.org. And with that, we're out of here for the week. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.